I hit the other one.
Leave meeting.
I think you have a few people that are still have your audios on. All right. We are currently live on Facebook right now. So I'd like to welcome you to our program. The Novi Public Library is proud to have our special guest this evening, Ms. Kathryn Harris, and she is from Springfield, Illinois. And as I mentioned to the people who are joining us on Zoom, she's done a wonderful presentations on Harriet Tubman and Jarena Lee. So if you scroll way back on Facebook, you'll be able to find some of the programs that she's done. But this evening, we're having a special program entitled The Colored Section of Oak Ridge Cemetery. And I'm so excited to hear what this is all about. And Ms. Harris is gonna currently show her slides and then we'll see her face at the end of it, okay? Welcome to you, Mrs. Harris.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm really very pleased to be here. And I hit the wrong button.
That's okay.
I want the audience to know that when I was library services director, I did lots of presentations, but guess what? I never had to prepare them because I had staff to do it. I got the material and they prepared it and just said, Kathryn, hit this button, hit this button. So anyway, but today I'm going to be talking about Oak Ridge Cemetery. Oak Ridge Cemetery is here in Springfield. It is the second most visited cemetery in the nation. The first most visited cemetery is that of Abraham Lincoln. And on the slide that's there, you will see that that is the Lincoln tomb. Oak Ridge Cemetery was established in 1856. The city of Springfield was incorporated in 1837. And the ordinance that created the cemetery reads in part that the Committee on Public Grounds shall set apart a portion of the grounds for the burial of the poor, another portion for burial of strangers or persons not belonging to the city, a portion for inhabitants of the city who don't have private lots, and another portion for the burial of colored persons. So this particular part of Oak Ridge has always been, since 1856, a part of the historic Oak Ridge Cemetery. On the right of your screen is the Lincoln tomb, which was created, well, they had starts and goes with the Lincoln tomb that is at Oak Ridge. But the current version that we see today was not finished until 1872. On the right side of the screen is the original receiving vault where Mr. Lincoln's body was received for burial in May of 1865. That receiving vault was most recently opened in 2015 for the sesquicentennial of Mr. Lincoln's burial. That was a big program in Springfield, and thousands, literally, of people returned to the city of Springfield to participate in the procession of the procession from the Lincoln home, which is kind of like in downtown Springfield, to the cemetery, which is probably 3 miles away. So the first burial that was made in Oak Ridge in the colored section, which was indeed, as I said, set aside by city ordinance, belonged to a woman whose name was Jane Pelham. Jane Pelham she was a resident of Springfield. She was born in Virginia in 1787, and she was a mulatto and probably a free person of color. people who were mulattoes, they were a cut above people who were strictly Black. And Jane Pelham was a neighbor and a friend of Abraham Lincoln. And according to local lore, she was fondly known as Auntie Pelham, Aunt Pelham, or Aunt Jane. She was listed in the 1850 city directory as living at 8th Street and Edwards. Mr. Lincoln lived at 8th and Jackson, and Edwards is just 1 block away. So she was certainly a resident of the neighborhood. She was a washerwoman, and when she passed away, she was about 67 years old. She was a member of the First Methodist Church. There's that, and not the AME Church, but the First Methodist Church in Springfield. And she was quite poor. And she sat on one of the rear seats on the north side of the church. They would pay for her from the poor fund to have a cord of wood for her fires. And she was an elderly woman, but she was a very strong faith that one of the stories that is told about Aunt Jane is that when she was living there, there was a whole bunch of conversation and very loud in front of her house. And they were having a conversation, but Auntie Pelham was partially deaf. And so that's why there was so much loud talking. But she was certainly a friend of Mr. Lincoln and lived in the neighborhood. And you can see her, her grave marker there. It's interesting, this is just an aside, but Oak Ridge Cemetery, the remains that were in the cemetery were moved from a location downtown in Springfield. Well, it would be downtown today. And it is where our Springfield High School stands. But it was originally the Hutchinson's burial grounds, and it was outside of the city limits of Springfield, because back in the day, when cemeteries were a part of the cities, the cemetery itself was usually very far removed from the heart of the city. And cemeteries were places where people would go and have picnics and visit, because the grounds of the cemetery have always been very well manicured and kept up, and a very pleasant place to have picnics. And as you see on the slide, Jane Pelham was born in 1787 and passed away in 1867, 2 years after the end of the war. Through the research that I have done over the years in reference to Auntie Jane, I've never seen how she got from her birthplace in Virginia to Springfield. So that's just a mystery to me. I'm going to the next slide, I hope.
Yeah, you should be able to just double click on the slide below.
Right. The next slide is that of another person who is buried in the colored section of Oak Ridge, and his name is William Donegan. I'm going to ask a question, and you don't have to answer, but I'd be curious if any of you who live in Michigan have ever heard of the 1908 Springfield race riot. It would not surprise me if you had not, because I did not learn of the 1908 Springfield race riot until I was, boy, I graduated college and had worked as a librarian for many years before I ever heard of the Springfield race riot. But the Springfield race riot is significant not only in Springfield history, but national history. It all came to pass as many riots happened, started with a lie. A white woman claimed to have been raped by a man whose name was Johnson. And moving fast forward without telling all of the ugliness that went on, it turned out to be a lie. William Donegan, he was not involved with the rape, but his house, which was about a block and a half from the Springfield State Capitol, the mob that, and it is said that the mob that was present for the Springfield 1908 race riot might have numbered up to as many as 5,000 people. William Donegan, who was an elderly Black man, was lynched on the second day of the riot, and the riot occurred on August 14th to August 15th, 1908. He had been an upright and well-known member of the community since well before the Civil War. According to the version as it appeared in the newspaper, William Donegan was beaten almost to insensibility. His throat was slashed from one ear to the other with a razor, and a small clothesline rope was tied about his neck. And then he was hanged to the limb of a tree at Spring and Edwards. The attack was broken up by the police and the state militia, and he died the next day at St. John's Hospital. Now, why was he involved at all in the race riot? He did not live in the area where the riot occurred. He lived not far from the city capitol. He was a man of good report in the community, probably over the age of 80. He was also wealthy, and he had been a cobbler. It is said that he made shoes for Mr. Lincoln. However, the one chink in the deck that led to William Donegan's demise was the fact that his wife, whose name was Sarah, was a white woman. And of course, in all of the hullabaloo that was going on with the race riot, that was just very incendiary, because keeping in mind that the cause, supposedly, of the riot was a rape. And here this man is married to a white woman. It did not matter that they had been married for over 20 years. And they just did not like that at all. And he was quite a dapper looking older man. I don't know how old he is pictured in this, but he was killed during the riot of 1908. You will notice that the headstone that is there for him and Sarah is of a modern vintage, because his burial place in Oak Ridge Cemetery, it was not marked. But when the commemoration for the centennial of the race riot was here in Springfield in 2008, the NAACP and the city put their dollars together and gave him and his wife, Sarah, this headstone. So that's about William Donegan. Oops, one too many. Oh, phooey. Okay. The 1908 race riot was indeed one of the catalysts, in case you did not know it, for the formation of the NAACP in 1909. So Springfield is an important part in not only national history, not only in Springfield history, Illinois history, but also in national history for the formation of the NAACP. This slide features Reverend Henry Brown. I've talked about Mr. Lincoln's funeral and the commemoration. Reverend Henry Brown was a well-respected AME pastor in Illinois. He was an itinerant minister, and he ministered to congregations not only in Springfield, but also in Quincy. Quincy is probably about not quite 100 miles west of Springfield. And when he did live in Springfield for a number of years and became friends with Abraham Lincoln. And when Mr. Lincoln passed away, out of respect, he was asked to walk in the funeral procession and lead one of Mr. Lincoln's horses. And so he is shown here with his horse, whose name is called Old Bob. The grave marker is real. You can barely read it. It has not been replaced with a new marker at the cemetery, but he lived long past the burial of Mr. Lincoln, which was here in Springfield in 1865. And Reverend Henry Brown lived in Springfield and Quincy until he passed away in Quincy in 1906. Private Lewis Martin is an interesting story. It's an interesting story because he served in the United States Colored Troops from Illinois, and he served in the 29th Illinois, which was a colored troop of soldiers that was mustered in again at Quincy. Quincy keeps popping up. Quincy was an important place in Illinois history because it's right there on the Mississippi River. And it's also an interesting place because right across the river from Quincy, we have the state of Missouri. Missouri was a border state, but the particular part of Missouri that butts up against Illinois was a slave state. So people who lived in Quincy often wanted to cross the Mississippi to get into Illinois, which was a free state. Private Lewis Martin, I think the word is a quadriplegic because he has lost one leg and one arm in service to his country. He was severely injured at the Battle of the Crater, sometimes called at Petersburg, which was a major battle of the Civil War. And it was one of the battles that proved to Mr. Lincoln, the commander-in-chief, and other white folks that the African American could be a soldier and he would indeed fight. And Private Lewis Martin is an example of one who fought. His grave marker at Oak Ridge was only installed only a few years ago because his grave was unmarked. But a group of Springfield residents, including a woman whose name is Kathy Hayworth, she did a lot of research and using, I'm not quite sure what it's called, but it's some kind of implement, because looking in the ledger for the burials that are in Oak Ridge Cemetery, she was able to identify the block and the lot where his body was, but it had never been marked. So using that information, they were able to ascertain where his body was. And there was a very nice procession and a very nice ceremony held several years ago when Private Lewis Martin's burial site was identified. Sadly, Lewis Martin, as a disabled veteran, because that is what he was, he got just a pittance of money from his pension, and he pretty much died destitute here in Springfield in 1892. But he kind of became somewhat a celebrity because a physician whose name was Betancourt took photographs of him, and they studied his amputations and how he was able to walk. He did have a wooden leg, and but he didn't have a prosthesis for his arm. He had well, I guess you would call it a prosthesis because he had a hook for his hand. But he was very much studied by I guess today it would be the National Institutes of Health. I don't really recall what it was called back in the 1860s, but he became kind of a scientific specimen for study. And he was from Springfield, Illinois, and is buried here at Oak Ridge. Okay, we did Reverend Henry Brown, so I don't know why you're showing up again. The next person that I'm going to talk about is Phoebe Floorville. Phoebe Floorville was the wife of William Floorville. Now you might ask, who is William Floorville and why is he important? William Floorville was the barber and confidant of Abraham Lincoln while he lived in Springfield. William Floorville arrived in Springfield the same year as Abraham Lincoln. They both arrived in Springfield around 1837. William had been a barber, and that is how he made his money. Phoebe Floorville, her name is Phoebe Roundtree Floorville. Her name, Roundtree, Rountree, no D, Rountree. She was likely the daughter of her master. And they all removed from Barrow County, Kentucky, in the early 1830s and arrived in Springfield in 1837. When she arrived here, she met and married William Floorville. William Floorville, being the barber, he was quite the man about town. Barbering was one of the few trades that African Americans could participate in back in the day. I always thought it rather humorous that to be a barber in the 19th century, you had in your hand a straight edge razor, and a lot of the patrons at the barbershops, they were white. I always wondered why weren't any of them ever murdered, especially during the time of the Civil War, when there was lots of hatred against Blacks, especially those who were free and in Illinois. I think that one of the most remarkable things to say about Phoebe Floorville is her funeral marker. It has lots of symbolism. First of all, it is a tree, and it's you don't see the top of it, and that is symbolic of a life cut short. There is a shawl on some of the on part of it that is to let you know that that was a lady because she had a shawl. The names of some of her children are also listed on the on her grave marker. There, I did not take a picture of the back side, but there are markings for some of her children. She had 5 children, and some of her grandchildren are also referenced on her grave marker. Phoebe Floorville was a woman who was a member of the Methodist Church in Springfield. Her husband, William, I think I'm competing against somebody's television. Thank you. Phoebe's husband, William Floorville, is not buried in Oak Ridge Cemetery because William Floorville was a Catholic, and the Catholic cemetery is right next door in the adjacent cemetery. The Floorvilles were wealthy. He was a barber. Floorville owned property not only in Springfield, but in Bloomington, which is about 70 miles west of Springfield. He owned real estate in Springfield. And when William Floorville passed away in 1866, he had the largest funeral of anyone in the city of Springfield up until that time, except for Abraham Lincoln. So he was quite a figure in Springfield history. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry. We talked about Reverend Henry Brown. We talked about Lewis Martin. Jamison Jenkins was also a person in the Lincoln history who is buried in the older part, the colored section of Oak Ridge Cemetery. Jamison Jenkins came from Virginia. He was born enslaved, but he escaped And with the help of Quakers, he arrived in Springfield. And so he, quote, took his freedom. The marker that's there is nobody knows his birth date, but he and his wife Elizabeth lived in Springfield. Jamison was a drayman. That means he owned a wagon and he hauled goods and materials and stuff for Springfield residents. The wagon that is shown here is a replica of the wagon that he owned when he lived in Springfield. Jamison Jenkins, and it's on the lot, in front of the lot where his house was. The yellowish colored house there that you see in the picture, that is a side view of the Lincoln home. They lived in the same block and they were indeed neighbors. When Mr. Lincoln won the presidency of the United States in March of 1861, Jamison Jenkins, well, he didn't win the presidency in March, but that is when he left Springfield to go to DC to become the president in March of 1861. And Jamison Jenkins drove him in his wagon to the Great Western Depot, which is on 10th Street. And that is where Mr. Lincoln made his famous farewell address from the back of a train car. And so that's about Jamison Jenkins. Then the last slide that I have shows Mr. Lincoln's funeral in Springfield here on May the 3rd, 1865. Mr. Lincoln had numerous funerals. And like I said, Reverend Brown was one of the participants in the funeral. And the funeral itself was, they called them divisions as to where people would march. William Floorville was in Mr. Lincoln's funeral. He was asked if he would like to walk in the funeral with some of the dignitaries because of the relationship that he had with Mr. Lincoln. And he declined. He said he wanted to walk with his people in the procession from his home to Oak Ridge, which is like 3 miles or so. And so that is what he did. You can see here the old state capitol. Well, it wasn't the old state capitol then, it was the Capitol. Is draped in black for mourning. And the hearse that is there, that is the hearse that was used for the funeral. When we had the recreation of Mr. Lincoln's funeral in Springfield in 2015, there was a replica made of the hearse that carried Mr. Lincoln's body to Oak Ridge, and it looked exactly like this. And the plumes that you see on the top, well, in 2015, those plumes were interfering with the electrical lines and the telephone wires. But of course, in 1865, we didn't have those things. So folks had to go ahead of the recreated funeral hearse and raise the wires up so that the hearse could pass through. The Mr. Lincoln's recreation of Mr. Lincoln's funeral created literally millions of dollars were generated for the city of Springfield because of this recreation. And there were people who came from across the country, literally, to participate in that event. I am now at the end of my slides, but I will be pleased to answer any questions anyone might have about the colored section of Oak Ridge or the 1908 race riot or Mr. Lincoln's funeral. The people that I chose to discuss tonight are the more prominent folks who are buried in the quote historic section of Oak Ridge Cemetery. There are some 367 burials in this particular part of Oak Ridge Cemetery, but only 100 or so of them are marked. And as I said, as you saw, not all of the markings of the markers for the historic part of the cemetery are contemporary to the times. Some of them are of more recent vintage. Oh, I failed to show one other item, and that was the marker for a man whose name is Scott Burton. Scott Burton was the second casualty of the 1908 race riot to be lynched, and he too is buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery. But if my memory serves me correct, his grave has just recently been marked within the last 5 years. So he much like Mr. Donegan, does not have a contemporary grave marker. So I'm going to close this PowerPoint, I think.
Okay, very good.
And maybe we can see each other. So
so far, so good.
I don't want to leave the meeting, so I'm just
we can
going
see.
to go back.
I saw
to
you.
Zoom.
Perfect.
What happened? Oh, there. Well,
It was
went
perfect.
away.
I saw you. Didn't we see her, everyone? You turn your camera on. That was a great presentation. I did learn a lot, and I enjoyed listening to what you had to share. So much information that many of us never heard of, didn't know anything about. So it was my pleasure to have you present that, and learning experience for many. If you have questions, please feel free to just open up your mic. You can ask your question, or if you're not comfortable talking, you can type it in the chat section. If you are watching from Facebook, you can type it in the comment section, and I can pose the comment or question to Mrs. Kathryn at this time. Any questions or comments? Did we learn anything, or did we already know this? I know we couldn't have, could we? It's something even today. I mean, when people tour this cemetery, is that now a more popular area to tour? Do people learn that along the tour, or do they still not really acknowledge that section very much?
No, they do acknowledge it, and there are tours. In fact, this spring coming up, our local alderman is going to have. I will not be going. He is going to have a bike ride through Oak Ridge Cemetery, and it one of the stops in the cemetery, aside from Lincoln's tomb, will be the colored section of the cemetery. And he has asked me to participate as a speaker at the cemetery. I will not be riding a bike from downtown Springfield to the cemetery.
Come on. I understand.
So that
so
is
I also,
supposed to be.
Tell me if you answered or not. I'm not sure. I'm sorry, am I talking?
No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you answered that or not, but how is it that some of those are very elaborate tombstones? Where did they come from? Are they from way back or more recent? Who contributed to that?
Okay, the one for Phoebe Floorville, for
Mhm.
example, that's like from the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century, because she passed away in 1897. So that is contemporaneous to the time of her death. Now, Mr. Donegan's grave marker, that was done recently. In fact, that was done in like probably 2008. It might have even been done in 1998 for one of the commemorative events for the race riot. The Lincoln tomb, after many fits and starts, it was finally completed and open to the public in 1872, I believe is the date. And if you ever come to Springfield, the tomb is really quite moving. Not only is Mr. Lincoln buried there, but also three of his four children, Robert, his only child that lived to adulthood, he is buried in Arlington.
Someone asked, do we know who designed the tomb marker for Phoebe?
No, and that is the question that has been routinely asked, and don't know the answer. It's not indicated in the records of the cemetery either. So it's, I think it's made out of sandstone, so it's very soft and very porous material.
So there are still many sites that are not marked at all, or are they all marked currently?
Oh no, like I said, there are in excess of 300 burials in the colored section, but only like 100 or so of them are marked. All of the names, however, are listed in the ledger for the cemetery, but they are not all marked. Some of them
continue.
Some of them are marked only with it just might be a brick that has a name on it. They all don't have headstones as we would call them today.
And do we know, is it because they don't really know the identity of who the people are, or they don't see the relevance or significance in acknowledging the people who are there?
Well, the ones that are marked with the flat stones, they are contemporaneous to the time the people passed away, and perhaps there are no relations or anyone kin to those folks, here to upgrade. The marker for William Donegan, that one was made because of the commemoration of the 1908 race riot. And so that was a joint effort of the NAACP, the city of Springfield, and interested citizens from the city. And the same goes for Lewis Martin's headstone too. And it's interesting about Lewis Martin's headstone. His headstone was provided by the Department of Veteran Affairs, but the person who spearheaded getting the headstone met resistance from, not resistance. The rule is to get a headstone for a veteran, you have to be related to the veteran. Well, this is a very nice white woman who spearheaded that, and she certainly was not related. She had to go through all kinds of hoops in order to get that headstone for Private Lewis Martin. And
really?
We could find no descendants for him either. And she had to present a genealogical research and ancestry and all of that, and convince the Veterans Department that there were no outstanding, there were no extant descendants for him And so she was able to move forward, but it was like almost a year worth of back and forth with government bureaucracy before she was able to get that headstone. And when we did, and I do say we because I was peripherally involved because I helped do with some of the research too. But when the headstone was officially installed or whatever, placed on the gravesite, we did have a ceremony and a couple of local reenactors, one who reenacts as a member of the United States Colored Troops, the 29th. He was one of the featured speakers at the event and shared the story of Lewis Martin.
Okay, I think I see another question in the chat section. It says, let me see, I can't see it, sorry everyone. Do burials still take place in the general cemetery or is it closed for new, recently deceased citizens?
Right, that part of the cemetery is full, so to speak. And there are no more burials in that area of the cemetery. And so you can be buried wherever you can afford a plot these days.
Any additional questions or comments? I have a little bit, few more minutes.
It is kind of, it tells a story about our country in that even in death, there was segregation because it was in the colored section. It's also interesting to me that adjacent to the quote colored section is the historic Jewish section of the cemetery.
Okay.
So different times and different whatevers. So
Someone asked what got you started in doing this research?
I work just being a librarian generally and people coming to the library and wanting to know and wanting to learn more. And so I have a very good friend who his name is Dick Hart. He would come to the library every day. He's an attorney. And he would come to the library every day at 4 o'clock, and it would really tick me off because we would cease. We stopped paging books at 4:30, you know.
Oh.
And he would come at 4 o'clock and did a whole bunch of books. And so they always seemed to be. They were always about African Americans in Springfield and local history. So I said to him one day, I said, Dick, you know more about Black people in Springfield than any Black person that I know. And I said, what prompted your interest in this particular part of Springfield history? And he said, it is because literature, historical literature, scholarly literature makes the claim that Abraham Lincoln did not really interact with Black people until he got to be president. So he was dispelling that myth. And he's very correct. Mr. Lincoln had he knew lots of Black people in Springfield, lots of them. Okay. So.
Talking about the race riot of 1908, someone asked, were there any prosecutions after the race riot? Do you know?
There was one prosecution after the race riot, and it had nothing to do with inciting the riot or destruction of property or anything like that. The one person prosecuted was a man whose name was Abraham Raymer. He was a truck, what would you call it? He sold vegetables from the back of his truck. And he was charged with theft because he stole a ceremonial sword from the home of one of the people who was affiliated with someone who had been in the race riot. who was killed in the race riot.
So that was the extent of the
That was
prosecution
the
out of
extent the
everything.
prosecution. Yes,
Mm.
yes, it was not a pretty story. But it's interesting that Springfield did not talk about the race riot at all. It was the dark spot on our city's past, particularly that it happened in Mr. Lincoln's hometown, in the home of the great emancipator, that we would have this race riot in 1908. The best thing that came from the race riot, however, was the start of the NAACP, because it was one of the catalysts that prompted the beginning of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is probably the most important civil rights organization even still today. And it has always been an integrated organization since day one. Ida B. Wells was one of the founders, and W.B. Du Bois and William Walling and Moskowitz. Can't remember the others. A man whose name was Valliard. But those are like 5 of the original 9 founders of the NAACP. It was founded in 1909, which in itself is interesting because the 1909 was the centennial of the birth of Abraham Lincoln.
It's really interesting bringing these names to light. Some we may have heard of in the distance and some none at all. So hearing about more people who are involved in history that help to form and shape the world that we have today is very important. As we wind down, we're going to take any other questions that we have, maybe one more if you have, or a comment. Someone can talk if they want, make a statement if they'd like to. If not, no pressure.
I just thank everyone who came and participated tonight.
We worked it out, didn't we? That technology popped right on in. We got it together.
Absolutely. It was kind of a challenge, but hey, we did it.
We did it. If you like any other additional information on African-American history, visit your local libraries. Come to the Novi Library. We actually have a pretty good display on the 2nd floor of a number of books that are available, or you can ask for them. And we can look into it for you and get them for you so you can learn as much as you'd like. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us this evening from Facebook and from Zoom. I hope you had some takeaways from this program, which will also be on Facebook if you'd like to revisit it and look over it again at some of the people who were mentioned. Otherwise, I'd like to wish you all a very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Mrs. Kathryn.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it
For sure.
very much.
I'd love to have you again.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.